Love is a beautiful feeling about which books, music, and poems are written. However, when it is the twisted love of a sick person, it can be so destructive that it breaks many fates. Amy Carnevale was born on April 13, 1977, in Beverly, Massachusetts, USA. Her father was a science teacher at a local school, and her mother worked as an investment advisor. Amy had a brother named Christopher who was born 4 years earlier. The Carnevale family proved to be typical representatives of the middle class who were able to realize their dreams. The family was united, all members were close to each other and did not abandon one another in difficult moments. But a few years after the girl's birth, the family began to break apart. Gradually, the mother and father concluded that they needed to get a divorce. At that time, Amy was 6 years old, and it was a big shock for her. She worried for a long time, but eventually came to terms with it. When she went to school, a new chapter in her life began, full of hope. The family did not lose contact with the child, so the echo of the separation of mom and dad quickly faded. Amy grew into a beautiful and intelligent girl and became popular at school. She joined the cheerleading team and played field hockey. Amy was very friendly and got along well with everyone. Despite her active social life, she was very connected to nature and preferred walks in the fresh air. Amy loved to combine nature with sports, often going golfing with her father, even though she lived with her mother. She had a good relationship with her father. She wanted to become a hairdresser in the future, as she enjoyed making her friends look beautiful. At the time of the events in question, she was about to transition to high school. As a cheerleader, she was immediately offered a spot on the team, which made her very happy. It didn't take long for her to meet a young man named Jamie Fuller. They met accidentally at a friend's party when Amy was 12 years old, and Jamie was already 14. By the time of the tragic end of this story, they had been together for a little more than 2 years. Everyone knew that Jamie was a difficult guy and often caused trouble. In elementary school, he was neither aggressive nor mean, but some of his jokes went too far. Amy's parents disapproved of the relationship, believing Jamie was not worthy of her. When he met the girl, he was a thin guy and later decided to start exercising. His main goal was to build muscles to become a tough guy. To accelerate this process, Jamie began taking steroids, and after a year of hard training, he became significantly more robust. The young couple had often had problems in their relationship, sometimes not speaking for weeks and then resuming their relationship. After Jamie started taking steroids, Amy and her friends noticed a dramatic change in his behavior. Jamie became increasingly aggressive and unpredictable. They began to argue constantly, both at school and outside of it. Jamie's behavior towards Amy worsened. Later, some friends reported that Jamie repeatedly physically attacked and threatened Amy, accompanied by vile insults she did not deserve. As she grew older, the situation worsened. She didn't know what to look for in a relationship or how to deal with such behavior from her boyfriend. His behavior was a display of power. Jamie tried to control her, and things got out of control. He started dictating who Amy could talk to and who she couldn't, found out where and when she was going, and tried to separate her from her closest friends and even her family. Jamie controlled her more and more, telling her what to wear, how to look, and who to meet. He tried to exclude her entire circle of friends from the school sports team, imposing himself on her and convincing her that Amy only needed him. Although she obeyed, he always found new reasons for insults and conflicts. Her friends repeatedly witnessed the humiliation she suffered from Jamie. Since 2020, some states have enacted a law that punishes attempts to manipulate and control a person. It has been proven that the lives of the victims begin to take a dramatic turn before they face real danger, such as physical abuse or even death. Unfortunately, at that time, there was nothing Jamie could be accused of, even though her friends were very worried about what was happening. Jamie's behavior became increasingly unpredictable, leading to legal problems. In the 90s, he was twice arrested for armed assault on a man, but due to his age and lack of a criminal record, Jamie got off scot-free. He persuaded his girlfriend to stay silent about these incidents, and she indeed told very few people about them. During this time, they broke up repeatedly and got back together. The relationship was clearly in a downward spiral. Jamie went out with other girls, Amy declared the breakup, but then they got back together. In this case, the girl almost did not share her problems with friends and family. In fact, she was raised by a mother who worked a lot and therefore had no opportunity to delve deeply into her daughter's private life problems. Amy herself remained reserved on this matter. At the same time, they were dealing with real estate issues, having been forced to rent a house for a long time. During this time, the girl stayed with various friends, briefly moving in with a girl named Diane Weger, her 15-year-old classmate. It turned out she was one of Jamie's ex-girlfriends. Nevertheless, the students got along well and became close friends. The situation was supposed to stabilize on September 5, 1991, when Amy was to move into her new house with her mother and brother. They had lived in a rented apartment for a long time, which had strained the family budget. The move was a long-awaited event that was to fundamentally change the family's life. On August 23, 1991, Amy was still staying with her friend Diane. Shortly before, she had broken up again with her manipulative boyfriend and did not intend to get back with him. That day, Amy went to another field hockey practice and excitedly told her friends that she had finally decided to end the toxic relationship. However, she also reported that Jamie kept calling her. Amy tried to ignore him, but he was too persistent. After reaching her, Jamie tried to arrange a meeting, but the girl refused. Then he asked her to give him a haircut as a farewell gesture to remember their past love. Finally, the girl agreed. That evening, she went to Jamie's house, intending to return in a few hours. But she did not return to her friend's house at the appointed time. The concern grew. This was a 14-year-old teenager, and the long delay worried the friend she was staying with. The girl called Amy's mother, but she could not find her daughter either. Suspicion grew because Amy had left her handbag and other belongings behind, indicating she would not be gone long. After waiting through the night, it was decided to notify the police the next morning. Fortunately, the police officers did not use the classic excuse that the disappearance had not been long enough to take action. After visiting the police station, the mother of the missing girl decided to visit her ex-boyfriend, where Amy was supposed to go. She told the investigators about the history of this toxic relationship, which immediately raised suspicion. Jamie was initially cooperative, speaking with the woman and the police, answering all questions willingly, and even joining a search party that began combing the area. Although he was the main suspect in the disappearance, no trace of the girl could be found. The young man's house and car were searched but to no avail. On August 28, 1991, the police station received a call from an informant who did not want to reveal his name. He claimed to know where Amy's body was and named the location. The police officers responded to this information with great interest. Naturally, the investigators wanted to know who this confidential informant was and how he had this information. They managed to track him down, finding a 19-year-old named Michael Marlett. The young man turned out to be Jamie's friend. When the police showed up at his door, he immediately decided to cooperate with the investigation. At the police station, he confessed everything he knew about the fateful night of August 23. According to him, Amy had planned to go to the beach with her friends the evening before the tragedy, on August 22. Jamie found out about this plan and was furious when he realized that his ex-girlfriend had actually gone to the beach party, where there were other boys. He became extremely jealous and lost control. Jamie paced the room like a wild animal. He still wanted to keep Amy under his control. Michael met with him that day, and Jamie revealed his plan to kill his ex. It turned out that several people knew about the manipulator's plans from the beginning, but for some reason, they did not go to the police. They did not tell anyone about the threat, not even Amy herself. Even the girl's parents were not informed of the potential danger. On the evening of August 23, Amy arrived at her ex-boyfriend's house, thinking she was going to cut his hair. It turned out that 4 boys were present: Jamie himself, 15-year-old Dominic Scholar, 19-year-old Michael Mallet, and 17-year-old Scott Ward. Just before the girl arrived, Jamie took out a large knife, showed it to his friends, and said he would massacre Amy. He placed it on the cabinet, wrapped it in a towel, and stashed it in his black backpack. When the girl arrived, Jamie suggested that the whole group take a walk in the nearby woods. During the walk, he went far ahead with Amy, and the other 3, according to Michael, lost sight of them. Michael also admitted that he didn't fully believe in his friend's intentions. He thought Jamie only wanted to intimidate Amy because of the breakup and jealousy. A few minutes later, the friends heard terrifying screams, but none of the boys dared to go and find out what was happening. They were all scared. Only Michael ran to the scene. There he saw a bloody girl on the ground, having been stabbed several times. The major wounds were on her chest, back, and abdomen. She tried to get up and run away, but the young man caught her, grabbed her by the hair, and slit her throat. Michael said he simply had no time to save the victim, having heard the screams too late. After Amy fell to the ground with her throat cut, she was still fighting for her life. Michael claimed she only managed to say, "Jamie, I love you." However, this made the perpetrator angry, and he began stomping on her head. Covered in blood, Jamie then returned to his friends and started recounting what had happened, brandishing the bloody knife. According to Michael, everyone was scared to interfere, fearing the same fate, and thus supported Jamie. Altogether, they returned home, drank, and talked for several hours in peace. Jamie showered, washed off the blood, and changed his bloody clothes. Then the killer and Michael went back to the woods to the spot where he had left the body. By then, it was already dark. They wrapped the girl's body in garbage bags, joking and laughing about what had happened, showing no remorse or regret. The police informant repeatedly emphasized that this was due to fear of the murderer. After wrapping Amy in garbage bags and tape, the young men carried the body to the car. Along the way, they continued mocking the victim. When they reached the pond, they tied several concrete blocks to the body and threw it into the water from the dock. The ex-boyfriend drowned the body of the dead schoolgirl after making another snide remark about her. Then he took out the bracelet and bloody necklace of his victim, wiped the blood off, and put them around her neck. This behavior resembled that of a serial killer, as such criminals often keep trophies to remember their crimes. After Michael told the investigators the whole story, he was asked again how he could have been involved in the death of the young girl. The young man explained that he did not stab her but only helped a friend dispose of her body under duress. He admitted he was scared of Jamie and wanted to keep the whole thing a secret from the start. Michael was sure his friend would kill him if he found out about the conversation with the police. He confessed that all the friends initially thought the idea of the murder was a bad joke and realized the gravity of the situation only when it was too late. According to Michael's testimony, the 3 friends just played along with the perpetrator to avoid provoking his aggression, but eventually, he couldn't bear it anymore and decided to tell the truth. On August 28, the informant was taken to the pond he had mentioned. Michael showed them the spot where the body was disposed of. Around 7:30 a.m., divers found Amy's body. It was in a deplorable condition, clearly having been brutally killed. The coroner found her in the same clothes she wore on the day of her disappearance, An analysis of the clothing revealed she had died on Friday, the day she disappeared. The experts could also confirm everything Michael said about her injuries. About 10 stab wounds were found on the victim's body. Her throat was deeply slit, and her skull was crushed by multiple blows. Jamie had probably stomped on her head. The police could not find Jamie, he was missing. The mother of the suspect claimed she did not know where he was. The police decided to contact the other young men Michael had mentioned. It turned out they had known about the plans for the murder for over a year. During all the time the young people broke up and got back together, Jamie had told them he could no longer be with Amy, but he was irresistibly drawn to her and didn't want to let her go. Unable to bear the thought of her being with someone else, he decided to kill her. The longer the police spoke to the two young men, the more gruesome details of the crime emerged. It turned out that shortly before the last breakup, Amy had told her boyfriend she was pregnant by him. He was very unhappy about this, especially since the girl wanted to keep the baby. Jamie was furious and even offered his friends money to attack Amy and punch her in the stomach, hoping she would lose the baby as he didn't want to be burdened with such a responsibility. But his friends refused. One of the perpetrator's friends described how Jamie screamed that Amy never agreed to an abortion, which ultimately led Jamie to decide to massacre her. After waiting for the autopsy results, the investigators found that the deceased was not pregnant at the time of her death. The pregnancy story became one of the many rumors and speculations surrounding the case. It was not proven that the victim was pregnant at all. It was possible she had terminated the pregnancy. Unfortunately, due to the condition of the body, it was impossible to confirm these assumptions. The investigators contacted Diane, who had been Amy's roommate before her disappearance. It turned out she was Jamie's ex-girlfriend and had experienced the same relationship problems as Amy. Diane could fully understand her friend's feelings, having gone through the toxic relationship herself. She had also been abused and pressured by her boyfriend but managed to end the malicious relationship without hurting herself. Surprisingly, Diane was also aware of her ex-boyfriend's intentions to murder Amy. Shortly before her friend moved in with her, Jamie had spoken of plans for a walk in the woods where he would first give Amy flowers, then stab her, and dump her body in a pond. But Diane did not believe the story and did not warn anyone about the danger. When the attacker was finally discovered, arrested, and charged with first-degree murder, he smiled. Jamie even made another joke about the deceased. He clearly felt no remorse or guilt. During the interrogation, he remained calm, even trying to blame his friends for Amy's massacre. However, questioning other acquaintances in the victim's immediate circle revealed that Michael had bragged about helping Jamie dispose of the body after the murder. He was also arrested for aiding in the crime. Apparently, the other two friends were also suspects, having witnessed the massacre but never reporting it to the police. They also knew about their friend's intentions, which he had been talking about for almost a year. At Amy's funeral, one of the witnesses to this tragedy, Scott Worth, attended. The young man even gave an interview to a local newspaper, stating that he still couldn't believe what had happened and felt guilty for not raising the alarm in time, even though he could have prevented the murder. At that time, an investigation was already underway against him. The teenagers revealed that Michael was not as innocent in the story as he claimed. He had incited Jamie, pushing him to kill the girl, and it was possible his role in the massacre was much more significant than he admitted. Finally, the police concluded that only Michael and Jamie were involved in the murder. The others had nothing to do with the crime and were not arrested. Public dissatisfaction grew. Everyone wanted to know the truth and protect the streets from scoundrels who kill schoolgirls without any particular reason. Residents believed, rightly, that all four teenagers were guilty of this tragedy. Their parents defended the youths, claiming they knew nothing of Jamie's plans, did not help him with the murder, and were therefore innocent. but the police already knew Jamie had repeatedly talked about his plans in the presence of the teenagers, who even urged him to act on his words. This behavior may have led the unstable Jamie to fear appearing weak. So what was the motive for killing Amy? Jealousy, a psychotic outburst, the desire to kill her child, or incitement? Although the young man was 16 at the time, he was tried as an adult. He pleaded not guilty and was released on bail of $10,000, paid by his mother. The defense argued that the young man had consumed alcohol, which, combined with steroids, could trigger an uncontrollable fit of aggression. Therefore, the defense wanted the case dismissed on grounds of insanity. The lawyers argued that the crime was not premeditated and that excessive use of steroids can cause psychoses and other mental disorders. They requested a psychiatric evaluation for Jamie. Several examinations were conducted, including by independent experts, and all found Jamie to be sane and competent. The prosecution, on the other hand, insisted that the motive for the attack was jealousy and the girl's alleged pregnancy. They pointed to his manipulative behavior, strict control, and constant attacks on the deceased in the last months of their relationship. According to Michael's testimony, Jamie wanted to get back at Amy for going to a beach party with her friends. Another friend in the company insisted that Jamie felt it necessary to end the girl's pregnancy by any means. The prosecution had numerous witnesses. One of Jamie's friends, Ronald, who had attended a carpentry class with him in the spring of 1991, also appeared in court. He testified that Jamie had told him about Amy's pregnancy and added that the only way to get rid of the baby was to kill the girl. Dominic, who was among the boys that evening, said he had seen Jamie and his girlfriend walking into the woods. Then he heard some screams. When Jamie returned to the others, he had a lot of blood on his clothes and hands. Jamie showed the others the bloody knife with which he had committed the massacre. The knife's tip was bent, indicating the extreme brutality of the attack. He had struck the weapon hard against the victim's bones, causing the knife to bend. Dominic confirmed Michael's words. Jamie told them the story of how he committed the massacre. According to the perpetrator, he first covered Amy's mouth and told her he loved her before stabbing her in the stomach. She was still alive when he slit her throat. Then the schoolgirl said she still loved him, which made Jamie so angry that he stomped on her throat and jumped on her head. Contrary to the defense's claim, the young men confirmed that the attack was committed soberly. They consumed alcohol only after the girl was killed. At the same time, the defendant's mother had previously told the police officers that alcohol had always had a harmful effect on him, causing rage and aggression. Once, he practically destroyed his room when he was drunk and arguing with his mother. But in this case, alcohol had nothing to do with it. The coroner, who testified for the prosecution in court, said he had found such deep stab wounds that they practically pierced the girl's body, indicating the immense hatred with which the murder was committed. No traces of sexual violence were found, meaning the attack was out of revenge or jealousy. One of the blows hit the bone, deforming the murder weapon. The girl also had multiple bruises on her face and head injuries. Any of the wounds could have been fatal, making it difficult to determine the exact cause of Amy's death given the condition of her body. Jamie did not testify in court but spoke to the media. He told reporters he couldn't have killed Amy because he still loved her. Of course, this was a lie from the perpetrator, who was apparently obsessed with his victim. This interview was another shock for the deceased girl's mother. She struggled to overcome the bitterness of her loss, taking tranquilizers and seeing a psychologist. Jamie's love declaration for Amy on television seemed to her as disgusting cynicism from the perpetrator. The trial lasted 7 days before the jury retired to deliberate. The prosecution insisted he was an extremely dangerous murderer with the potential to become a serial killer and therefore should spend the rest of his life in prison. The defense, however, insisted that the young man had lost control due to steroid abuse. The jury deliberated for 2 days, taking about 6 hours to reach a verdict. Jamie was found guilty on October 23, 1992, and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. While Jamie was being sentenced, the authorities still had to deal with his friend Michael, who had clearly helped him dispose of the evidence. After a hearing on his complicity, Michael was sentenced to 2 years in prison. The deceased girl's mother considered this an unjustly light sentence for aiding in Amy's murder. After the trial, Jamie was sent to a medium-security prison, where it was expected he would spend the rest of his days behind bars. But in the summer of 1993, his mother Celeste and her partner Edward devised a plan. The worried mother decided to get her son out of prison. Jamie was to seriously injure himself to be taken to a hospital outside the prison, from where he would be freed. They managed to hire 2 male inmates to attack and injure Jamie. However, the plan was initially doomed to fail because the prison had its own hospital. Nevertheless, the attackers did not consider these details and began preparing for the assault. Unbeknownst to them, the prison authorities were aware of their intentions. The phone calls in the prison were monitored, so the plan was known from the preparation and discussion phase. Consequently, Celeste and Edward were arrested, and their son was transferred to a high-security prison for the attempted crime. In fact, it was Jamie's cellmate who prevented the likely new crime. He informed the prison director when Jamie told him about his escape plan. His statement was supported by telephone calls. Celeste and Edward refused to plead guilty. The hearing took place on September 9, 1993. All 3, including Jamie, were charged with aiding and abetting a prison escape, organizing a prison escape, and conspiracy. The trials took place between September 1993 and 1994. All 3 were found guilty. Celeste was sentenced to 6 to 9 years in prison, her partner to 2 years, and Jamie's life sentence was extended by another 99 years. The young criminal soon tried to appeal the sentence, citing his minor age, but his appeal was denied. Unfortunately, there was a glimmer of hope in his story. In 2013, state law changed so that offenders convicted of serious crimes as juveniles were eligible for parole. Each case was to be reviewed individually. As a result of these changes, Jamie, who had spent most of his adult life in prison, could be released in 2019. By then, he was 40 years old. Jamie's parole application was considered but indefinitely postponed. The family of the murder victim repeatedly appealed to the authorities, insisting that this violent man should not be released under any circumstances. To this day, he remains in prison. Amy's mother never recovered from her daughter's death. She was forced to constantly see a psychiatrist and take a large number of prescription medications. In 2009, her health deteriorated dramatically, and she died at the age of 57. Those close to her were sure that her early death was related to the death of her little daughter. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourselves.
There are often stories in which victims, after their own death, return to the world of the living to take revenge on their perpetrator. That probably only happens in movies, you will say. Well, that's true, but in life there are stories that are much more interesting than in the cinema. Stories that are so interesting that directors go to great lengths to make a film based on real life. Just such a story you will hear today. Because Judy practically rose from the grave to punish her abuser and help other women. When Bonnie and Daniel entered the ward, they felt like they were about to be sick. On the bed lay a bandaged body. It had almost no skin left, no ears, and only fingers on one hand. At first glance, they thought the nurse had done something wrong. According to the doctors, Judy only had a few hours to live because with such injuries, death is practically pre-programmed. Today's story shows one of the most incredible displays of human strength ever seen. This woman's life was a series of trials, one of which ended very tragically. But on the threshold between life and death, Judy Malinowski managed to change the justice system in her state. Judy was born on August 26, 1983 in Columbus, Ohio. There she also spent her childhood with her brother Patrick and her sister Danielle. Before Judy was born, her mother had several unsuccessful pregnancies, so the girl's birth was a long-awaited miracle for her parents. Since Judy was the oldest child, it was her responsibility to look after the younger children. She adored Danielle and Patrick. All three were not only siblings, but also close friends. Judy also had a special relationship with her mother, who treated her eldest daughter like a friend. During her school years, Judy excelled in everything. She was good at school, made many friends, and was one of the most popular in her class. Her energy and charisma did not go unnoticed. The high school student won several beauty pageants and was even crowned Miss New Albany. At her prom, she was elected prom queen. After graduating from high school, Judy continued her studies at Ohio State University. She dreamed of teaching at this school. She told her mother about her plans for her life. She wanted to lead a simple, quiet, and peaceful life, find a job after university, and settle down in a nice little house with a loving husband and children. She spent most of her free time not at youth parties, but volunteering in a nursing home. She wanted her career to take the path of helping others, but soon she needed help herself. Her idyllic world was plunged into chaos. A great tragedy occurred in Judy's life. She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. In the first few months, it seemed as if life was over and as if she was destined to die young. The young woman fought seriously for her own health and for the beautiful future she dreamed of. During this time, there was much to regret, to cry about, and to lament fate, but in the end, the hard battle was won. Amazingly, Judy managed to beat the cancer. Overcoming the terrible illness strongly influenced the student's character. She realized she could do what most people could not, and now she had to be happy and live the rest of her life as she had dreamed as a child, in love and harmony. When Judy turned 21, she met a man named Ron. The young people fell in love at first sight and soon married. They had two beautiful daughters, Kyne and Madison. Judy thanked God for her happiness. The illness had no effect on the birth of the children. Both babies were healthy. The young woman's childhood dreams slowly began to come true. Unfortunately, someone from above apparently decided that Judy had not yet experienced enough in her life. When she was pregnant with her second daughter, Madison, she learned that her husband was having an affair on the side. This news completely devastated the woman. When Madison was born, the relationship with her husband was finally broken and the couple divorced. Around the same time, Judy suffered a relapse. The cancer returned with renewed force. At this point, there was only one solution to the problem: a full hysterectomy, a gynecological operation to remove the uterus. The young 25-year-old woman was heartbroken. She didn't understand why life was so unfair to her. She had dealt with the illness before and won. Why did she have to go through it again now? To get rid of the illness, Judy agreed to an operation which was quite successful. It seemed she could celebrate a victory a second time, but the operation to remove her uterus left her with such severe pain that only prescription painkillers could help her continue living. The country was in an opioid crisis at that time. Strong medications were prescribed in excessive doses. This led to many people becoming addicted to prescription drugs. Judy happened to be one of them. After the operation, the pain never subsided, and if she refused to take the pills, it became unbearable. The constant use of strong painkillers led to addiction, and the medications no longer worked. Either higher doses or even stronger medications were required. Judy had taken the pills for so long until her health insurance no longer covered the treatment costs. This meant that the woman could no longer afford the prescription drugs. As a result, she turned to illegal substances. In fact, she became addicted to illegal substances that relieved her pain even a little. It went so far that Judy's life completely fell apart. The pills cost a lot of money, and relationships with family and friends became increasingly strained. Addiction to controlled substances also meant that it became difficult for Judy to care for her daughters. It was good that the family stepped in. The eldest, Kyne, was taken in by her grandmother Bonnie, and Madison was taken in by her Aunt Danielle, Judy's own sister. Although relations with relatives were sometimes strained due to the young woman's addiction, they never gave up on Judy, as they didn't want her to go through this ordeal alone. The family did everything they could to help her during this difficult time. Finally, Judy realized that her addiction was part of her impulsive decisions that affected not only herself but also her children. This forced Judy to come to her senses. Rehab followed to get clean and get her life back on track. It was hard, but Judy Malinowski persevered. She simply took it as another fight for her own future, and once again the woman triumphed. She showed such drive that her life changed dramatically after rehab. Judy finally returned to her former happy and cheerful state. The addiction was now completely under control. She managed to get back on her feet, find an apartment and a job, and see her daughters again. She continued to attend meetings for addicts, but she felt empowered to finally lead a normal life again. Malinowski now had the quiet, peaceful, and happy life she had always dreamed of. It lasted a few years, and then everything collapsed again, because Judy's ordeal was not over yet. It all started with a man named Michael Slager. At the age of 31, Judy met a man who contacted her via social media. They had crossed paths once before at an acquaintance's place when the woman was still married, but she hadn't paid him any attention then. In 2014, Michael happened to see a picture of Malinowski online and began to get her attention in every conceivable way. He commented on her posts, liked her photos, and wrote her personal messages. A kind of online friendship developed between the two until Michael confessed his feelings to her some time later. The man said he liked Judy at first sight, but then she was married and he didn't dare to approach her. He tried to forget her but happened to come across her photo on social media, visited the page, and found out that the woman's heart was free. Michael showered Malinowski with compliments and said exactly the words she wanted to hear. He was attentive, considerate, loving, promised to give her peace, tranquility, and love, in short. He used all his charm to win her heart. It was in April 2015, just a few months after they had started chatting via social media, Malinowski changed her status and wrote that she was in a relationship with Michael Slager. Michael's charm worked. From that point on, everything went downhill. What Judy didn't know was that her new chosen one had an extensive criminal record. When Michael met Judy, he had already been convicted of theft, violence, illegal carrying of a weapon, assault, forced sexual intercourse, threats, false reporting to the police, resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, and so on. The list of his convictions could go on for a very long time. It became clear that the law meant nothing to him. Michael was a career criminal, but somehow he managed to hide this from his new girlfriend. Although Judy's mother Bonnie knew from the first meeting that something was wrong with this man, she couldn't even explain why she didn't like him. But Michael used manipulation and told Judy's mother not to judge Michael for his tattoos and some character traits, because even Jesus forgave people their sins. Bonnie backed off and decided it was her daughter's life. Soon Michael moved into Malinowski's apartment and immediately felt like the master of the house. This happened just a few weeks after Judy had changed the status on her social media page. His obsession and his attempts to control began to manifest in every little thing. Michael wanted to control every aspect of Judy's life, who no longer had any say. For example, Malinowski was not allowed to leave her apartment without Michael's permission. She was only allowed to go outside accompanied by him. Slager installed a tracking device on Judy's phone, and then the abuse and physical assaults began. There was another thing Michael did to completely suppress and destroy Judy's will. He found out that her life had been hell not too long ago and she had struggled with her addiction. Although Judy had all but conquered it by this point, Michael decided to use his girlfriend's weakness to his advantage. He wanted her to be weak, vulnerable, and completely dependent on him. To put his plan into action, Slager bought a batch of illegal substances while actively encouraging the woman to relapse. If Malinowski became addicted to illegal substances again, she would be completely at his mercy. Michael could use it against her at any time. He himself took nothing. He was not a dealer. He just bought pills on the street and spent his own money. As strong as Judy's character was, it's not for nothing they say that addiction haunts you for life, and you have to work hard not to relapse. In the following weeks, Slager continued to burden her with manipulation, insults, and guilt. One day, Judy snapped. She became addicted to illegal substances again, and her life went downhill. Meanwhile, Michael created a false impression of his role. He called Judy's mother and complained that her daughter was high again, that she was out of control, taking more and more every day, squandering her money, and was interested in nothing but another dose. Bonnie believed her daughter's boyfriend and felt sorry for him because she thought he was just a hostage of the situation. Slager seemed to her almost like a saint, carrying a heavy burden of responsibility for the wayward daughter. The woman even gave him some money so he could pay the bills, groceries, and other necessities. But Michael spent it to buy another dose for Judy. It seemed as if this man had appeared out of nowhere just to ruin Malinowski's already difficult life. One day he called Bonnie and said that her daughter had taken so much of the illegal substance that she had passed out. The woman panicked and called emergency services and reported an overdose. The doctors who arrived found that Judy was perfectly fine. Michael convinced them it was an overdose, but Judy had already regained consciousness. This was done intentionally so that Malinowski's medical record would show an entry for an emergency call due to a suspected overdose. Slager did everything he could to make those around him believe that Judy herself was the problem. He portrayed her as being completely down due to an overdose, which justified his physical abuse and violence. Michael began to beat Malinowski for the slightest offense. Her body was covered in bruises, and once he almost choked her. Judy was so intimidated that she was afraid to turn to the authorities. But one day she had enough and she wanted to report the domestic violence. But thanks to his manipulations, the authorities simply didn't believe Judy. Before them stood an addicted woman accusing a sober man who was taking care of her. That's how it looked in the eyes of the police. They didn't take Judy seriously and thought she was just making it all up. Michael looked like a good man who was trying to help his girlfriend with her addiction. That's why Slager created situations from the beginning so that people would later believe Malinowski had lost her mind and couldn't be trusted. His devious plan worked. The bullying continued until Judy persuaded her mother to help her kick Michael out of the apartment. But all of Bonnie's attempts failed because Michael wouldn't go anywhere. Help from the authorities was not even dreamed of. At this point, Judy had no choice but to run away herself. She slept at her mother's and friends' places, rented hotel rooms, and tried to stay away from Michael. She was completely powerless against him. But whenever Malinowski ran away from the apartment, Slager would call the police and report her missing. The police officers found the woman and brought her back. Once Judy took Michael's car to get away from him, but he immediately reported it stolen, and the woman was warned by the authorities. Every time she came home, the man let her know that the police were on his side and that Judy could do nothing about it. He warned her that one day he would get tired of putting up with her escapades, and if Malinowski decided to leave him, he would simply kill her. No threat could intimidate Judy because life with Michael was worse than death for her. so she didn't want to give up the fight. Her last desperate plan was to go to rehab, get clean, and get her life back on track. It was a safe place where Michael couldn't get to her. She would no longer be dependent on him since the man supplied her with drugs. Now she could overcome the addiction and start anew. Unfortunately, Judy wouldn't even be able to go to a rehab clinic, as Slager made one of his most violent threats come true. This would change the life of the woman and her entire family forever. On August 2, 2015, 4 months after the relationship began, Malinowski was about to put her plan to go into rehab into action. At this time, her 2 daughters were living with their grandmother, so the 2 were safe. Judy informed Michael of her decision, as he otherwise simply wouldn't allow her to leave the apartment. Surprisingly, the man agreed and even offered to take her to the hospital himself. So Judy and Michael drove to the Parkside Rehabilitation Center, which was near Columbus, Ohio. On the way there, however, the woman asked for some time to mentally prepare herself. She persuaded Slager to drive her to her mother's house so she could say goodbye to her daughters before they parted ways. Michael stopped the car and they drove to a gas station to buy drinks. On the way there, a heated argument broke out between the 2, which continued at the gas station. Judy was fed up with the whole thing. She wanted at least a few minutes alone, so she got out of the car and walked across the parking lot. Michael started the truck and followed her. All her movements were recorded by the surveillance cameras. When he caught up with Judy, the man demanded she get into the vehicle. They started arguing again. When the situation finally became heated, Malinowski spat soda from the cup she was holding in her boyfriend's face. This incident enraged Michael so much that he went back to his car, pulled out a gas can, and poured its contents over Judy. He drenched her from head to toe and said this was a reaction to her antics. The woman felt the gasoline get into her eyes, ears, nose, and throat. Judy started to choke. She couldn't see anything and was completely disoriented. She stumbled, fell onto the sidewalk, and begged Michael to stop. But in his eyes was a cold, dead look. He didn't care what Judy said or how she felt. The only thing he wanted was to inflict as much pain and suffering on her as possible. Then the man went back to the car, took a lighter, and held it in front of Malinowski's face. Judy was horrified. She cried and repeatedly begged Michael not to do it, promising to meet all his demands and never to anger him again. But he quietly lit a lighter and touched her clothes with the flame. The fire engulfed the fuel-soaked clothes in an instant. The woman began to roll on the ground to put out the flames. She looked like a red fireball. Every part of her body was in flames. It felt to Judy as if 1,000 glowing needles were being stuck under her skin simultaneously. And Michael stood there watching as his girlfriend burned alive. His eyes at that moment were black, cold, and soulless. He watched, satisfied with what he had done. The craziest part was that this all happened in broad daylight and under the eyes of surveillance cameras. Slager probably thought he was above the law and could do whatever he wanted. There were also people in the parking lot. They rushed to Judy to help her put out the flames. A man ran towards her and yelled at Michael to do something instead of just standing there. When he finally gave in to the pressure, Slager finally got a fire extinguisher from the car and extinguished the flames on Judy. Several people immediately called emergency services and reported that a man had set his girlfriend on fire. Paramedics and police officers soon arrived on the scene. Incredibly, Judy was still alive. She was taken to the hospital, and the police were busy investigating the circumstances. Michael described the incident as an accident. He claimed Judy had spilled gasoline on herself while refueling her car and then went to the back of the gas station to smoke. It looked as if the entire fire had been started by an accidental spark from a cigarette. When the family received a call from the Ohio State University Hospital saying Judy had had an accident and was on life support, they were not told over the phone what had really happened. Mother Bonnie and sister Danielle, understanding nothing, rushed to the clinic. What they saw horrified them. Nothing could have prepared them for what they would see upon arrival at the hospital. Mother and daughter even wondered if they had come to the right room, but it was indeed Judy lying there before them. 99% of her body was covered with third and fourth degree burns. Her skin was charred, her hair was burned off, as were her ears. Judy had lost several fingers, her clothes were practically embedded in her skin, and her face was completely unrecognizable. It was the worst thing they had ever seen. At this point, Malinowski had already been placed in a medically induced coma. Her chances of survival were nil. The doctors did not expect the woman to live for more than a few hours. Among doctors who treat burn victims, there is a mortality equation used to estimate the probability that a victim will die from their injuries. This calculation includes the percentage of burns on the body and the patient's age. According to the nurse who cared for Malinowski, the probability of death in her case was 110%. Meanwhile, investigators questioned Michael to get the truth about the incident out of him. At first, the man stubbornly refused to admit his guilt, but the investigators had already seen video footage from the gas station and knew that Michael had doused Judy with gasoline. When he was informed of this, he changed his story, but it was still far from the truth. Slager said it was all an accident. He and Malinowski had a small argument and the woman threw soda in his face. He then jokingly decided to douse her with gasoline. Since she ruined his clothes, he did the same to hers. Then Judy allegedly wanted to smoke, so he handed her a lighter. According to him, the clothes accidentally caught fire. His words were still doubtful. The only person who could confirm or deny his statement was Judy Malinowski herself. But at that moment, she was sedated, barely clinging to life, and was unresponsive. Her answers would determine whether Slager could be charged. Therefore, after consulting with the doctors, it was decided to bring the victim out of the coma to clarify the situation. It was extremely risky, but the time frame was hours. That's how long Judy's doctors had predicted she had. Given her condition, no one knew if the plan would work, if the woman could hear them. After all, her ears had been severely damaged in the fire. Nevertheless, Judy was brought out of anesthesia. She made it clear that she could hear the questions and was able to answer them. The investigators asked questions, and Malinowski nodded yes or no. She was able to confirm that it was Michael who had intentionally doused her with gasoline and then set her on fire. This interrogation on the brink of death showed Judy, who was in excruciating pain, trying to tell the police the truth about the incident at the gas station. After this questioning, the doctors continued treatment, although they knew Judy had at most a few more hours to live. But hours turned into days, days into weeks, and Judy kept fighting. Her doctors were amazed she was still alive. Of course, the woman was in a terrible condition. She was wrapped in dressings and bandages from head to toe, which had to be changed twice a day. It was unbearably painful. Her burned skin bled and festered, and the bandages stuck. To change them, Judy had to endure excruciating pain every time. She couldn't move and had breathing problems, so it was decided to put her back into a medically induced coma, which lasted for 7 months. During this time, she had to undergo about 60 operations, many of which were unsuccessful. Her arm was amputated because it was burned to the bone, and she received skin grafts. Once she almost died on the operating table. While Judy fought for her life every day, Slager sat in jail awaiting his trial. He was charged with aggravated arson and assault, but Michael still denied doing anything intentionally. He probably even sat in a prison cell thinking that Judy would never recover and testify against him. And although it sounds terrible, the investigators were also waiting for Judy to die so they could charge Slager with murder. While the authorities worked on the investigation, the woman lay in a coma for months. Her life hung in the balance. The lead investigator no longer hoped to hear that Malinowski had regained consciousness and was ready to testify. He was very surprised when he received the call from the hospital. This was the first case with a likely fatal outcome where the investigator would meet and speak with the victim. Judy could only answer questions in a whisper. She knew it depended on her whether the man who had maimed her would go to prison or continue to ruin other women's lives. When Malinowski saw herself in the mirror 2 months later, she swore to herself that she would find the strength to seek justice. Michael's defense team said that it would be much worse for Slager in the long run if he went to trial and Judy testified against him. The jury would immediately develop hatred and anger towards him, and if Judy died from her injuries in the future, he could be held responsible for her death. Michael himself and his defense team did not want to allow that, so he changed his plea from not guilty to a plea of no contest. There was no trial since he did not contest his guilt. He received the maximum sentence for aggravated assault and arson, that is, 11 years in prison. Although this was the maximum sentence for such a crime, Judy was heartbroken. All she wanted was justice. The woman wanted her voice to be heard but also felt that Michael had silenced her once again. Malinowski, however, did not give up. She kept fighting as long as she was alive, even in her vulnerable state. It was no longer so much about justice for herself, but about protecting other women from similar monsters. Judy wanted to use her situation and what she had been through to help future victims who were in the same situation as her. Judy Malinowski spent months in a hospital bed. All that time, with the help of her family, she advocated for a change in the criminal justice system. The woman advocated for a new law that provides for a maximum penalty for intentional assault. Although Judy couldn't change Michael's sentence, she ran this campaign for future victims by recording messages directly from the hospital. She experienced the unbearable pain caused by the man she had fallen in love with and fought for justice for others. In January 2017, her health deteriorated rapidly. Doctors and relatives felt that Judy's strength was fading, and she was tired of fighting. At this point, the prosecution realized that they needed to record Malinowski's testimony to be able to prosecute a case of intentional homicide later. Previously, the prosecution team, like Judy, had been angered by Slager's lenient sentence, so they approached her to record her testimony for a possible trial regarding her death. This had never happened before. They had to try to ensure that Malinowski's story would help in the future to punish the man who had ruined her life. The prosecutors didn't fully understand how this would work. They had to deal with the complexities of the court system to foresee the legality of their actions in the future. At that time, there was no case in the United States in which a victim of a fatal crime had testified in their own murder trial. Judy's condition worsened day by day. However, the painkillers she was taking had to be significantly reduced to ensure her mental clarity during her testimony. Yet she agreed. Judy in particular had repeatedly proven that she was a fighter and capable of breaking the system. The prosecution gave Malinowski the opportunity to record her testimony on video before her death. It was expected that these recordings would be shown at her trial for her murder. To prepare for these difficult recordings, the woman decided to fight the pain herself and completely stop taking painkillers so that Slager's defense could not accuse her of any incapacities. For several weeks, she got used to living without pills. When Judy succeeded in this and her condition stabilized, she was finally ready to tell her tragic story. The worst part was that Michael asked to sit in the same room next to Judy during the questioning. He had the right to confront the person accusing him of assault face to face. But fortunately, the judge saw this as an intimidation tactic, and Slager's request was denied. Instead, medical personnel were kept at Judy's side. Family members were also excluded from the room. Malinowski was connected via video call and was sworn in directly in her hospital bed. She was to be questioned by both sides, prosecution and defense. It was all like a routine interrogation, except for the fact that Judy was lying in a hospital bed, fighting for her life, and telling a story that would only see justice after her death. The woman, damaged by the fire, gathered all her willpower and was able to recall the events of that tragic day. She remembered her thoughts at that moment. Judy was sure she was going to die, so she simply prayed to Jesus to forgive her sins and take care of her children. After that, she lost consciousness and only woke up again in the hospital. Malinowski then described what it was like to be burned alive. She wanted to make it clear that it was not an accident but an intentional act. When one of Michael's lawyers cross-examined her, he reminded Judy of her addiction, how she had allegedly stolen a car from her boyfriend, and the accidental overdose when emergency services had to be called. The lawyer tried to portray Malinowski's story as unreliable and questioned whether she had provoked Michael that day. He wanted to question her cognitive abilities, as the woman's condition left much to be desired. But that was precisely why Judy had endured the severe pain and refused to take her medication. Throughout the cross-examination, she showed incredible strength and courage and never once wavered from her conviction. After the video testimony, Judy had finally achieved what she had endured all the pain for and could now rest in peace. It had taken a lot of strength for her to endure this ordeal, which noticeably affected her well-being. No one knew how long she would live after such a strain. In June 2017, after almost 2 years of daily struggle, Judy made the decision to move into hospice care. On June 27, 2017, days after the tragedy, Judy Malinowski passed away at the age of 33. By her side was her mother Bonnie, who supported her unfortunate daughter until the very end. Almost a year later, in July 2018, Michael Slager was finally brought to trial for the massacre of Judy. The man wanted to plead not guilty. At the preliminary hearing after Judy's testimony in court, however, Michael's lawyer advised him to accept a deal to avoid the death penalty. Slager finally agreed to the deal and pleaded guilty in exchange for a life sentence without the possibility of parole. It turned out that this was exactly what Judy Malinowski had demanded before her death. She wanted Michael to receive a life sentence because the death penalty would have been too lenient a punishment for him compared to what she had gone through in the last 2 years. Judy hoped that this man, while sitting behind bars, would reflect on his actions and realize the gravity of his guilt. After the case was closed, the family founded the Judy Foundation, which supports victims of domestic violence and addicts. Judy's incredible efforts were not in vain. In the summer of 2017, the state of Ohio passed a new law called Judy's Law, which included all the changes Malinowski had called for. Judy's 2 daughters, who were 13 years old at the time, attended the bill signing event. The girls sat next to the state governor as he signed the law. In a room full of reporters, the younger daughter described her mother as brave, while the older daughter added that at least her mother had not suffered in vain. Judy's law was passed by the state senate the day after her death. Thanks for watching and take care. In the small town of York, Pennsylvania, 19-year-old Erica Miller disappeared. It seemed as if she had simply vanished into thin air. The police had no leads whatsoever. No one knew where she was and why no one had heard from her. The case was at a standstill until the Miller couple made a terrifying discovery on their farm. In the quiet town of York, Pennsylvania, most residents relaxed after work. The mother of the 19-year-old, however, had a hard time. Emergency services understood. We are on our way to the crime scene. Brenda Miller went to the York police and filed a missing person report for her daughter. Nothing had been heard from 19-year-old Erica for 48 hours. Brenda, a single mother, lived with a roommate named Manuel. Together in the evenings, Erica sat on the couch and watched TV. It was all as usual. Brenda went to bed, and Manuel apparently didn't go to bed for a while. He went into the kitchen to get something to eat and then also went to bed. When Brenda woke up and got ready for work, she found that her daughter was not at home. Erica had taken neither her handbag nor her cigarettes with her. The mother knew that her daughter would not have left the house without these items. Brenda then called someone and went to work. When she returned, she, however, found that her daughter was still missing, and her cigarettes, her lighter, and her handbag were in the same place. The woman began to worry. She had overheard her daughter's phone call before she went to bed and remembered that Erica had said something like, "Will you still be there?" Brenda understood if Erica were to be away for a few days, she would definitely let her know. She didn't work and lived with her mother. Where could she have gone? The police found no signs of forced entry at the scene or a struggle. The only thing Erica had taken with her was her long green dress that she always wore. All this indicated that Erica left the house voluntarily. What if she didn't want to be found at that time? Some people thought that Erica had spontaneously gone away for a while. Maybe she wanted to travel or simply make a change of scenery. That sounded just like Erica. She was a typical teenager who drifted around looking for her place in life. Her brother, Chuck, decided to go there and Erica followed him, but she soon realized that the army was not her way, and so she left the service and returned to her mother. Brenda's intuition told her that something was wrong. She knew from her gut that something was wrong, and she was sure that Erica was in trouble. On January 20, 1995, another day passed, but she still hadn't heard from Erica. The investigators began to find out who had last seen her. Initially, everyone who had been in contact with her in the last hours before her disappearance was suspected. The police had to rule out that they were involved in the case. Based on the phone records, the investigators found out which of Erica's friends she had last spoken to. Her close friend was Janie. They called each other every day to chat. This evening was no exception. Brenda remembered that Erica had said something on the phone like, "Will you still be there?" Jenny, however, had no plans to see her friend that evening, and Erica had not mentioned any plans for the evening. If Brenda hadn't heard that, it meant that Erica had chatted with someone else after talking to Jenny, but with whom? The police turned again to Erica's inner circle. Suspicion fell on the person who had last seen Erica. It was Manuel, a close acquaintance of the missing person who had seen her before her disappearance. It was clear to him that the investigators were interested in him. Manuel stated that he had gone to bed shortly after Brenda, who claimed to have spent the night beside her. Manuel did his best to prove that he was not involved. The west side of York is considered a very quiet neighborhood. Here, many families live in houses that have common walls. That is a good place for families with children. The houses are close together and the neighbors are friendly and quite close-knit. Exactly in this neighborhood, flyers about Erica's disappearance hung on telephone poles and in the local store. Of course, people began to discuss it and put forward their own theories. When something like this happens, everyone talks about it. Activists of the Citizens Association of the Neighborhood Residents questioned all the neighbors whether they had seen strange cars or strangers near their houses, yet no one noticed anything suspicious. The residents had many questions. What if Erica ran away, left voluntarily, or went somewhere with a friend? All residents of York speculated. Erica's brother, Chuck, tried to support his mother. He tried to direct the conversation to other topics and simply asked the woman not to worry. Brenda did everything possible and impossible to find Erica. She and other relatives called hospitals and combed the streets of York, one after another. Brenda was suspicious of everyone. She believed that anyone who had spent even a moment alone with her could have something to do with her daughter's disappearance. Perhaps it was the fear of the unknown and uncertainty that made her paranoid. The general excitement grew, but one person remained calm, Chuck. No one wondered why he wasn't particularly concerned about his sister's fate or tried to find out where she was or why she wasn't in contact with anyone, but Chuck knew what was going on. Erica was not disappeared. Pennsylvania, January 1995. Nothing had been heard from 19-year-old Erica Miller for a week. Her picture was scattered all over the city while the police and her mother eagerly searched for her. Her older brother Chuck kept the secret to himself. A few days, maybe a week, before her disappearance, her sister told him that she had found a job that paid $15 an hour. In the 90s, that was considered a good salary. The thing was that a friend of Erica, who knew about her interest in the military, had offered her a top-secret assignment. It was a kind of witness protection program. One had to guard a woman who might be in danger. It was presented as a secret mission, and Erica made her brother promise not to tell anyone, not even her mother. She didn't want Brenda to worry. Chuck was the only son her sister could trust. Erica said it would take a few days, maybe a week, and asked him not to worry. February 1995. 2 weeks had passed since Erica's disappearance, and the police received their first calls from informants. The many tips and speculations shocked everyone who had been following the situation, especially Brenda. When someone disappears, many versions of what happened immediately come to mind, and the first thing you think about is whether you can do anything to help. People assume all sorts of things, e.g., that Erica was with a hunter and decided to run away with him and live in the country. A witness said that on the day Erica disappeared, he heard a man and a woman arguing near her house. She was allegedly seen here and there, sometimes with one, sometimes with another person. The police had to check all these versions. They were given different addresses and advised to question different people. All these tips were rather gossip. The officers refuted them as quickly as they appeared. It was as if the steam from your mouth in cold weather vanished into thin air. So it was with this investigation. The officers got a tip that seemed sensible to them, but only for a short time. It was difficult to process this whole flow of information. The police officers tried to decide in advance whether the next lead could be helpful for the investigation, and if they concluded that this was not the case, they moved on to the next lead. Then, someone told the police that Erica was having an affair with the father of one of her friends. The man's name was Earl. The most important thing about this report, however, was that he had apparently disappeared around the same time as Erica. In this flood of information, the police were primarily interested in this older man. Almost everyone put forward their own version of the story, and some people began to look for Earl. They suspected that he was in some kind of relationship with Erica. When a tip comes in and you believe it to be true, you start to convince yourself that this was the case. However, it turned out that Earl had nothing to do with Erica's disappearance. A few days later, no one believed anymore that Erica had run away because she had taken nothing with her. She had no savings. At this point, it was clear to everyone following the situation that Erica was in trouble. Everyone wondered, could she still be saved, or was it already too late? Erica's friends also exchanged their opinions and tried to understand what had happened and who was behind it. The police officers, for their part, had to follow every lead. They had worked in many directions in the investigation of Erica Miller's case, but they had come to no conclusion. It seemed as if she had simply vanished into thin air. The police and her mother had to navigate a fog of rumors and speculations. 3 weeks had passed since Erica's disappearance. Brenda suspected everyone. She no longer trusted even the closest people, doubted their sincerity. This also included her roommate, Manuel, who, according to the police, was the last person to see Erica alive. Manuel didn't seem to take it badly, wasn't as worried as everyone else. It was as if he thought he should mind his own business and not put bad things in his head. Manuel decided to stay out of it, but an old family friend named Bill came to Brenda's aid. Bill and Brenda dated for a while, but then decided to break up and remained friends. He helped her distribute flyers and search for Erica. The man was always there for her. Brenda was very annoyed when another tip led to nothing, and Bill helped her not to lose hope. The first suspect in this case was Manuel, but this version was dismissed almost immediately. The investigators found out that he had nothing to do with Erica's disappearance. Many people couldn't understand how something like this was even possible. How could the young woman just disappear? 6 weeks after Erica's disappearance, the York police received a call. Investigator Ekin Rode traveled to a farm outside the city. He still can't forget what he saw on the day of his arrival. The crime scene had already been cordoned off. The man immediately smelled the scent of death. According to the investigator, he realized what had happened even before he saw it with his own eyes. In a fairly neatly dug grave lay human remains. The victim was barely clothed, wearing only socks, and his head was covered by a kind of green coat. According to Brenda Miller's description, the coat belonged to her daughter. The medical examiners soon confirmed that it was indeed the body of 19-year-old Erica. When Brenda Miller finally learned what had happened to Erica and found out the details, she literally felt sick. The woman lacked the words to describe what she felt. It's the kind of tragedy you don't want to talk about. Erica's brother, Chuck, was at the Marine base when he learned of his sister's death. Chuck immediately thought of the job his sister had taken and realized that someone had taken advantage of her trust. He told his mother the secret that Erica had entrusted to him and which she had asked him not to reveal under any circumstances. This shocked Brenda, but she wasn't angry with her son. When he thinks back now, Chuck doesn't understand how anyone could believe such a thing, why he didn't question it, why he didn't suspect that something was wrong. Imagine how Erica must have felt in that moment, betrayed, cheated. But this terrible discovery helped us find out what exactly happened to Erica. She was shot twice in the back of the head with a 12-gauge shotgun. Her mouth was covered with duct tape. The investigators found a 12-gauge shell casing in the pit. The mystery was not yet solved, but it was clear where Erica was and what had happened to her. It remained to be seen who had done it and why. Normally, it turns out that the perpetrator is someone the victim knows. The investigators suspected everyone Erica knew: the mother's friends, ex-boyfriends, classmates, colleagues. Any of them could be behind her death for some unknown reason, but who exactly was capable of such a thing? Investigator Ekin Rode spoke with the owners of the farm where the body was found. At first glance, the couple had nothing to do with the victim. Tom March and Churie Smith only came under suspicion because they lived on the property where the body was found. During the search of their house, the police found a shotgun and 12-gauge cartridges. The body was buried on the property of the two. In the victim's grave, a shell casing was found with exactly the same cartridges that were found in the bag in the homeowner's refrigerator. What conclusions would a normal, sane person draw from this? The couple was questioned immediately, and according to Churie, a friend of Tom's had asked in January to bury secret documents on their property. It turned out that the man had a friend nicknamed Animal, whom they had known for years. He often came to them, always carried a gun, and looked like a soldier. He was involved in prisoner exchanges, spied on people, and was also a bounty hunter. Churie and Tom had heard nothing bad about him. They had been in contact with him for several years, had seen him show up in court, always with a gun. Churie knew nothing more about him. He didn't seem suspicious to her because he was Tom's friend, and that's how he had behaved from day one. One day in January, he wanted to bury a box of documents about his work on Tom's and Churie's property. He said that this way he could save money on insurance, yet over time, Churie found the man and his demands increasingly suspicious. One day, she went to the store and saw a picture of Erica Miller on a sheet stating when she had disappeared. According to Churie, she unconsciously felt some kind of connection to her. Churie stated that she asked Tom that same evening to dig up these boxes. She waited until he came home from work. By that time, it was already dark, but they found the spot anyway. The hole turned out to be small, and as soon as Tom started digging, Chury saw a human hand. The woman quickly returned home and immediately called the police. Afterwards, she asked Tom if he had anything to do with the murder. After the discovery of Erica Miller's body, the missing person case was turned into a murder case, and the owners of the farm, Chury Smith and Tom March, had to answer many questions. At this point, the investigators had very little information. Primarily, they wanted to find out if these people were telling the truth and if their statements were logical. According to Chury, it all started with a strange request from Tom's friend. She realized that the request was very unusual, but decided that Tom could take care of it himself. Tom, for his part, hadn't expected to find anything like that. He was sure that there was just an ordinary box of papers there and not a woman's body, but they eventually found a body. The investigators immediately believed that Chury had suspected nothing, but at the same time, there was a possibility that Tom was hiding something. The investigators believed that Chury was not involved in the murder, but her husband, Tom, had fallen under suspicion. Forensics confirmed that the shell casing found near Erica's body matched his shotgun. For the investigators, there were two possibilities. Either these people were lying and were nevertheless involved in the murder, or someone they considered a friend had set them up. To get to the truth, the investigators scrutinized Tom's story about his buddy. He knew him by the nickname Animal because he really resembled a large animal, about 1.90 m tall and 90 kg heavy. Supposedly, he had his own armed group that dealt with tracking down criminals with badges, protective vests, handcuffs, and other equipment. He seemed a little strange to Tom, but that didn't bother him much. They grew closer and eventually became good friends, went hunting, and often spent time together. One day, Animal asked Tom to accompany him in his car. He had to observe a house to find a man. Tom agreed, and each of the two men drove in his own car to watch the house. It took them about 2.5 hours. Tom still doesn't know exactly what Animal needed, a person or information. It turned out that the man repeatedly involved acquaintances and asked them to help find this or that person. This had been going on for 5 years. Tom thought it was his job and tacitly agreed to get in his car and track down the house. According to Tom, Animal had approached him with a request 6 weeks earlier. The man had asked him to lend him a shotgun for hunting. Tom had no problem agreeing, but warned him that there wasn't much ammunition left and asked him to return it when he was done with it. They never spoke about the subject again, but that wasn't all. In mid-January, Animal asked to bury a box of papers on Tom's farm, and Tom didn't think much of it. They had been in contact for several years, and Tom knew that what he said had to be taken either skeptically or seriously. At that moment, none of it seemed suspicious to him. Tom's story would have seemed strange to anyone because, first of all, one had to believe that the man worked as a private security guard when he walked around with a gun, an ID, handcuffs, and a bulletproof vest. A reasonable person would not have believed that Tom March really harbored no suspicion or he was a complete idiot. But had Tom told the truth, it was important for him to prove that he did. The man was tested with a lie detector for about 2.5 hours. The investigators asked him endless questions, repeated them, and changed the wording. Tom did everything that was asked of him to prove to everyone that he had nothing to do with the murder. And he succeeded. Tom's conscience was clear. The man was guilty because he was too trusting, but he had not committed the crime. Tom agreed to help the investigators find the man he knew as Animal. The next day, he wanted to visit him at his workplace. The investigators found out the place and time of the meeting and sent 2 police officers there. A silver station wagon with a radio antenna and a marine bumper sticker pulled up at the agreed location. The suspect didn't get out but just parked and stared straight ahead. He didn't even ask why the police officer was pointing a gun at him. At that moment, investigator Ekin Rode realized that he was dealing with a man who was completely different from the criminals he had encountered so far. The police had a variety of different data and assumptions that were all somehow connected, but had not yet formed a coherent picture. As soon as the suspect got out of the car, the investigators began to unravel the mystery of Erica's murder. It turned out to be James William Bagley, who was also known to his friends as Bill. When Chuck found this out, he realized that his sister had been deceived and murdered by a man he had known and respected for years. Imagine you know someone your whole life, and suddenly it turns out that he has been shamelessly lying to you the whole time. Forensics searched his car. They found traces of blood on the floor mat, a chain, and a roll of duct tape in the trunk. No one could believe that the murderer was a friend of the victim's family. Bill said he had been in the army and worked as a bodyguard. Brenda considered him a decent man, and Erica saw him as a mentor. The man got to know the victim's mother, became a family friend, and even helped hang up flyers for the one whose kidnapping he had carried out and ended it with a brutal murder. This was a shock for everyone in the neighborhood and in the city. Everyone wondered whom one could trust after something like this. Even good acquaintances became suspicious as a result. After Bagley was arrested, the investigator began his interrogation. He went into the interrogation room, sat down opposite the arrested man, and asked him if he knew what was going on. Bill replied that it was either about illegal substances or Erica Miller. The investigator knew that it wasn't the former, whereupon the man requested a lawyer. That was the end of the conversation. Investigator Rode had encountered many sinister people in his time with the police, but this man had a peculiar, vacant look, like a man who feels absolutely no remorse for his actions. You could see that Bill never confessed to Erica's murder. They had the impression that he felt very drawn to Erica. He decided to use his power and authority to do it. He broke up with Brenda Miller and found a way to be alone with her daughter by making her a tempting job offer. Investigator Ekin Rode believed that Bill lured Erica out of the house and took her by force to Chury and Tom's farm. She was naked and was apparently sexually abused. According to the footprints found, he had killed her in the pit. The jury found James Bill Bagley, nicknamed Animal, guilty of the kidnapping and murder of Erica Miller. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Earl, Manuel, Tom, and Chury were cleared of all suspicion. Later, an interview with Erica's brother was recorded in which he showed pictures from the childhood of the two of them. One of them shows her as a teenager. He commented on the next picture as a happy time. The picture was taken a year before his sister's death and shows her and her mother at Christmas in their grandmother's house. Erica was no longer with them. For a while. He had the feeling that his whole life had gone down the drain and he couldn't recover from it. He didn't know how to deal with it, how to return to his old life after such a tragedy. When they found out it was James's work, the first thing they wanted to know was why. Apparently he was mentally ill, but they didn't want to make excuses for him. They even asked Bill directly, but he didn't want to tell us anything. They thought he was simply evil personified. Bill lived up to his nickname. He became an animal, a beast in human form. Thanks for watching and take care of yourself. Guadalupe Medina Pichardo was born on January 16, 2013, in the municipality of Nezahualcóyotl in the eastern region of the Mexican state of Mexico. She was the youngest daughter of her mother, a woman named Yadira Medina, and her mother's partner with whom she had a long-term relationship. Although the name of Guadalupe's father was not disclosed, it is known that he and his wife had two other children named Angel and Karen. Furthermore, Yadira herself had another child that she gave birth to by an unknown man. Guadalupe's mother was reportedly born in 1999. She grew up in a modest household with her parents, whose names are not known, as well as her brothers Cesar and Brian and her sisters Eveline, Maria, and Elle. Maria. Yadira's childhood was not easy. Rather, it was full of difficulties primarily related to the constant conflicts between her mother and her father, who at that time worked in a clothing factory. Yadira's mother was literally consumed by jealousy and constantly accused her husband of infidelity, leading to an unbearable living environment. In reality, Yadira's father was not only faithful to his wife, but also provided for the family's financial and emotional well-being. Unfortunately, tensions arose between the couple one day, and the man decided to leave the family. Yadira herself said she felt as if a part of her heart had broken. Soon after, the atmosphere in the family home became much tenser. Yadira's mother, frustrated by her husband's departure, began to exhibit increasing physical aggression towards the children. It is hard to say what the main reason for this was, but most often the woman's anger was directed against Yadira. One of her brothers, specifically Cesar, tried to look out for her well-being and even took on the role of a father figure in her life to some extent. However, this was not enough to diffuse the unfavorable situation. Be that as it may, Yadira soon began to display quite disturbing behavior. This behavior manifested itself primarily in her dealings with other people. A striking example was when the 7-year-old Yadira brought alcohol to school and gave it to her classmates. That, of course, had consequences. And finally, Yadira was expelled from school. At that time, she decided never to go back to school, and none of her relatives tried to persuade her otherwise. Consequently, she never learned to read or write. Since then, Yadira spent much more time at home, which further exacerbated her problems and conflicts with her mother. She even began to think about how she could end the situation. So, at the age of only 8, she ran away from home. In her childish imagination, she saw a future only with her father, and he took her in. But just 2 months later, he died from complications of diabetes. After that, Yadira was forced to return home to her mother. This time, however, she realized that if she lived with her mother, she would become a target for aggression. Therefore, she decided to spend as much time as possible outside the house. Soon, the street became a kind of refuge for Yadira. Unexpectedly, she found herself among homeless people who banded together to survive. These people gave Yadira a sense of family, but they also taught her bad things. So Yadira, despite her young age, began to break the law and consume illegal substances. At the age of 12, she was forced into sexual intercourse for the first time, not by a stranger, but by her own maternal uncle. It is not known why, but this terrible event drove her to return home. Perhaps she sought support and comfort from her relatives. When she finally returned and told her mother what had happened, her mother lost control and hit her with a hose. Such a reaction logically worsened her suffering, and she decided never to trust anyone again. Later in 2004, Yadira became pregnant for the first time, and since the child's father did not acknowledge him, Cesar, Yadira's brother, became her main support again. He taught her to be strong and to accept all the challenges life held for her. Motivated by his words and concern for the well-being of her future daughter, Yadira gave up illegal substances for a while. Soon after, her first daughter, Belen, was born. However, she was either unwilling or simply unable to take responsibility for childcare, so this task fell to her mother. Contrary to expectations, the grandmother cared for Belen lovingly and caringly. Meanwhile, Yadira herself plunged back into street life and returned to consuming illegal substances. She chose a neighborhood in Mexico City called Pantitlan as the scene of her illegal activities. It was an important transit point in the city's public transport system, always crowded and busy. Indeed, it was the perfect environment for Yadira and her petty criminal activities, on which her survival directly depended. Mostly she was a thief, but there were also rumors that she was occasionally involved in transporting contraband goods. Her mother often came to the place and tried to get Yadira to come home, but her pleas never achieved the desired result. Yadira herself had become accustomed to this way of life and considered the street the safest place to live. After some time, Yadira met a young man who, like her, suffered from an addiction. The new acquaintances then began a romantic relationship, and in 2009 they had their first child together, whom they named Angel. 2 years later, Karen was born. But as before, Yadira entrusted the care of the children to her mother, who in turn placed them in the care of a neighbor named Laura. A few years later, namely in January 2013, Guadalupe was born. Yadira didn't even go to the hospital to avoid incurring significant costs for the birth. Even before the birth, she decided to give the child up for adoption. For this reason, she did not take the necessary steps to register her daughter and did not issue any official documents for her. In other words, legally speaking, Guadalupe did not exist. In April of the same year, Yadira was arrested for trying to steal diapers from a supermarket in the city. She was subsequently sentenced to 2 years and 4 months in prison. Guadalupe, who was only a few months old at the time, was then placed in the care of her Aunt Evelyn, who was also struggling with addiction problems. Shortly afterwards, Evelyn did something unbelievable and sold her niece for only 1,000 pesos to a local garbage collector named Gonzalo. I should point out that Yadira also knew Gonzalo. She saw him sometimes walking around the street, but no one dared to tell her that her daughter was with him. Every time she called her mother from prison, she told her that Guadalupe was fine and that Evelyn had her. But in reality, her child spent her childhood with Gonzalo. He taught her how to separate plastic and recognize the markings on bottles, which they later took for recycling. In the meantime, Yadira, far from home, spent her days waiting for the rare visits of her brother Cesar. He was still the only one who believed in her, no matter what happened. The young man always encouraged her and urged her not to give up hope for a better future for herself and her children. But at some point, Cesar stopped coming. A few days later, Yadira received the news that he was no longer there. It turned out that someone had tried to rob Cesar, but he had defended himself and finally disappeared. This news was a real tragedy for Yadira. She couldn't come to her senses for a long time. When she was free again, she wished for nothing more than to see Guadalupe. As soon as Yadira found out where her daughter really was, she immediately set out to find Gonzalo and took her daughter away from him. Marina, one of her sisters, recognized that Yadira had no means to support herself and care for Guadalupe. She therefore offered Yadira to stay with her temporarily, at least until the situation stabilized. Yadira gladly accepted her sister's offer. She was now determined to take her life into her own hands and care properly for her daughter. After living with her sister for a while, Yadira moved with her daughter into a rented room in the house of the aforementioned neighbor named Laura. I would like to remind you that Laura also cared for Yadira's other children, namely Angel and Karen. To make ends meet and pay the rent, she took a job as a vendor at a vegetable stand at the local market. It seemed as if her life was finally taking a turn for the better, but soon everything changed. This happened after Yadira visited her brother's grave in the cemetery. There she remembered that Cesar had always been there for her and supported her. He certainly belonged to those she truly loved, regardless of her inadequacies and lifestyle. The visit to the cemetery, however, was a severe test for her, and soon she returned to her old habits, namely the consumption of alcohol and illegal substances. In the process, she completely forgot about her daughter Guadalupe. Soon after, Yadira met a young man named Pablo Rodriguez Escamilla. Little is known about him. According to some reports, he was born in 1990 in Mexico City. Like Yadira, he also had a bad relationship with his mother. Furthermore, Pablo had many problems with the law. Mostly the young man was charged for consumption and possession of illegal substances. In total, he spent about a year in prison. After his release, he returned to his activities, combining the sale of illegal substances with robbing passers-by. When he met Yadira, Pablo himself had stopped consuming illegal substances, but he still had an immediate craving for alcohol. Shortly after meeting her, he even invited her for a few beers in a bar. In a surprisingly courteous manner, he was accommodating and even paid the bill. So a romantic relationship began between Yadira and Pablo. Subsequently, they even began to live together, albeit on the street. After a few months of living with her new partner, Yadira went to Laura to discuss Guadalupe's future fate. First, she said that she could keep her daughter if Laura gave her a sum of 1,000 pesos. Although Laura loved the little girl and wanted to keep her, she couldn't raise the amount named by Yadira. Finally, Yadira took her daughter with her. But this time, too, they didn't live together long. Already in December 2016, Yadira decided to place her daughter in the care of a stranger's family. But after only 2 months, Yadira regretted her actions and took Guadalupe back. At that time, her life situation was even more difficult. She had no steady income, and her dependence on illegal substances was getting worse. Furthermore, her alcoholic partner was no help at all. All this caused some concern to Yadira's relatives and other people around her. It is known that some of them even offered Yadira their help, but she repeatedly refused, even though she herself practically paid no attention to the child. Moreover, Pablo began to abuse Guadalupe more and more frequently. When her mother and little sister visited one day, it became known that Pablo had beaten her again. Soon her grandmother became aware of the mistreatment of Guadalupe. She then filed a complaint with the state organization responsible for monitoring children's welfare, but she never received a response. In mid-March 2017, Guadalupe accidentally wet the makeshift bed while sleeping. When Yadira realized what had happened, she flew into a rage. Pablo, who also noticed the incident, gave the child a few hard slaps. But that wasn't enough for the young man. He then continued his abuse. Yadira always remained indifferent in such moments. Her daughter's suffering didn't interest her. It was the same this time. And when Guadalupe fell to the floor again and hit her head hard, it was clear she was dead. But even this tragic event didn't embarrass Yadira. She and Pablo simply wrapped the child's body in a blanket and then carelessly threw it away in the neighboring colony. The next morning, a passerby noticed the blanket. Out of curiosity, he came closer to examine it more closely. Then he noticed that an object was wrapped inside the blanket. Finally, he gathered his courage, unwrapped the blanket, and discovered the lifeless body of Guadalupe. The girl was wearing a green coat and a purple t-shirt with a fairy pattern. The man estimated that the deceased was no older than 4 years old. When the shock subsided, he immediately called the police. Paramedics and police officers arrived soon after and confirmed that the girl was dead. According to initial assessments, the main cause of death was a head injury. The child's body was later taken to the local forensic medicine service office. Simultaneously, the authorities initiated an official investigation. Meanwhile, Yadira and Pablo returned home, disposed of their clothing, and cleaned up the crime scene. Shortly afterwards, she intentionally injured her face and prepared a speech to give herself an alibi in case anyone asked about her daughter's whereabouts. She intended to claim that Guadalupe's biological father had attacked her and kidnapped the girl. However, when Marina asked about her niece, she told her a completely different story. Some time later, the police officers received the final autopsy results. In addition to the obvious head trauma already identified by the emergency services at the site where the body was found, the report also pointed to another possible cause of death. There could have been bleeding in the area of the pancreas, liver, and kidneys. Furthermore, the forensic examiners determined that the girl was between 4 and 5 years old and about 10 cm shorter than the average for children of that age. Undoubtedly, all this information was more than dramatic, as it indicated not only abuse, but also that the child had not been properly nourished or cared for over a long period. Much worse, however, was the fact that when trying to establish the girl's identity, it turned out that no records about her had been kept. In other words, neither her fingerprints nor her DNA samples matched any data available in the law enforcement system. Even more surprising was the fact that no one had reported the girl missing. No one seemed interested in the child's fate. Months passed. During this time, all available information about the child was repeatedly mentioned in the media, but the authorities were unable to find the perpetrators of her death or her relatives. Meanwhile, Yadira and Pablo returned to their usual lives without the slightest remorse, continuing to consume illegal substances and alcohol. But in contrast to the shockingly unmoved mother, there was someone who was genuinely interested in the case, a nationally known activist from the state of Jalisco named Veronica Bellabasu. She was generally a human rights lawyer specializing in investigating crimes against women and children. Convinced that the authorities' efforts were ineffective, Veronica Basu took the matter into her own hands and launched a major campaign to find the deceased girl's relatives. Soon after, she circulated a picture of the child on social media. Later, a forensic examiner named Rosa Alejandra joined the campaign. She created a new portrait of Guadalupe, which was subsequently shown regularly on news programs. As a result, many people called Veronica to tell her they believed they knew the victim. However, none of these leads ever led to the truth. Finally, at the end of November 2017, Marina, Yadira's sister, saw a picture of the child still being shown on television. She immediately thought this little girl looked like her missing niece Guadalupe. Determined to find out her whereabouts, Marina contacted Veronica and told her about Guadalupe. Soon after, the activist visited her and showed her a photo taken by police officers when the body was found. Although Marina hadn't seen her niece for some time, she could say with certainty that it was Guadalupe. On December 24, 2017, the Attorney General's Office of the State of Mexico arrested Yadira and Pablo as the prime suspects in the crime. Simultaneously, preventive measures were imposed against them, and both were placed in pretrial detention. At the same time, experts compared Yadira's DNA samples with those of the girl and finally confirmed their relationship. Surprisingly, the suspects confessed to their deeds during the first hearing. While awaiting their trial, they were taken to a social reintegration center in the municipality of Nezahualcóyotl. The trial in this case, however, did not take place until early September 2019. Judge Cesar Menchaca immediately stated that he had no doubt that the defendants had committed this heinous crime. After presenting all the evidence, he found Yadira Medina Pichardo and Pablo Rodriguez Escamilla guilty of the murder of little Guadalupe. Through the verdict, both criminals were sentenced to 88 years in prison. In addition, the convicts were sentenced to a fine equivalent to more than $30,000. Obviously, they did not have this money. Nevertheless, they must repay it by working several hours a day throughout their imprisonment. The government lawyers assigned to the offenders immediately stated that they would apply for a sentence reduction. Marina, Yadira's sister, has asked the court for protection for her entire family. She was seriously concerned that Pablo's relatives might try to harm them. Thanks to the tireless efforts and commitment of some people, the Guadalupe case is exemplary, at least in terms of the pursuit of justice. Thanks for watching and take care of yourself.